On a cool evening in early December 2015, a ranch owner in rural Arizona opened her door to find a polite stranger asking for a place to spend the night. The stranger was Haruchika Miyagi, a successful 34-year-old entrepreneur from Utah, and his unexpected plea for shelter was just the beginning of a baffling mystery. Moments after being turned away, Haruchika sped off in his red Mazda sedan, crashing through a gate as he vanished into the night, and he has never been seen again. Haruchika Miyagi was by all accounts a bright and accomplished individual with a promising life. He was of Japanese descent and sometimes went by the nicknames Haru and Chika. He lived in American Fork, Utah, where he had graduated from Utah Valley University and established himself as an entrepreneur and day trader. Haruchika created his own investment software program called Tensai and was involved with several companies in the finance and tech sector. In addition to his business ventures, he maintained a prolific presence on social media. He posted frequent updates and even uploaded numerous YouTube videos on diverse topics, though most of these were related to finances in some way. The chain of events leading to Haruchika's disappearance unfolded over just a few days in late 2015. On December 3, 2015, Haruchika failed to show up at his workplace, which immediately alarmed his friends and colleagues. That same evening, he posted on Facebook around 9 p.m., marking the last known contact anyone had with him. The post mentioned the importance of giving to others, and seems pretty much in line with what Haru would generally be posting to his social media accounts. However, it did mention that he wanted to give as much as possible, which has been interpreted in a more sinister light, given what would happen next. When no one could reach him by the end of the day on December 3rd, a missing person report was filed in American Fork. At that point, Haruchika's sudden absence was already out of character, and while he was a quirky guy, he was good-hearted and always kept in touch with his friends and family. 2 days later, on December 5, 2015, Haruchika surfaced in a place no one expected, the small community of Dewey, Arizona, over 550 miles away from his Utah home. Dewey is a small and somewhat desolate desert community in northern Arizona. Also, before you leave angry comments about me calling Dewey desolate, I absolutely love isolated communities in the Southwest, to a somewhat weird degree. But anyway, I'm going off script. Let's get back to business. That late afternoon around 5 p.m., a resident on a remote ranch property off Orm Road, near Dewey, called authorities to report a trespasser on her land. The trespasser was Haruchika Miyagi, and after navigating miles of rough dirt roads, he drove up to the woman's house. He politely asked if he could spend the night on her property, though she sensed that something was quite off with him at the time. Unsurprisingly, the homeowner refused and suggested he get a hotel in a nearby town. According to the woman, Haruchika remained calm as he returned to his car. Unfortunately, rather than turning around normally, he sped forward and crashed through a closed gate on his way out. This seemed incredibly odd to her because he had been so calm and composed just moments earlier. About 2 hours later, around 7 that night, deputies found Haruchika's Mazda abandoned in a dry creek bed not far from that ranch. The car had heavy front-end damage and was wedged against a barbed wire fence, but Haruchika was nowhere in sight. The car was towed from the remote spot, and investigators began a thorough search of the surrounding desert and ranch lands. Over the next several days, search and rescue teams combed the area with helicopters and dogs, but they found no trace of Haru. The dogs didn't pick up any scent to follow, and checks of local hospitals turned up nothing. Haruchika's cell phone was never found, and records showed it connected to a cell tower shortly after he left the ranch, then shut off. Haruchika's family in Utah had no explanation for why he would go to Arizona. He had no known contacts or business there. Utah and Arizona police worked together on the case, but as weeks turned into months without any answers, the mystery only deepened. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to him after his car was found, and the events of that December evening remain uncertain. With a case as puzzling as Haruchika Miyagi's disappearance, numerous theories have emerged to explain what might have happened. Investigators and the public alike have carefully considered each scenario, from the mundane to the extraordinary. It's important to note that all of these ideas are speculative. There's no hard evidence yet to confirm any particular outcome. However, examining the most frequently proposed theories can shed light on the possible fate of this good-natured entrepreneur. One leading theory is that Haruchika fell victim to a tragic accident, or perhaps simply just to the elements after fleeing his vehicle. People seriously underestimate the dangers associated with deserts, and it's possible to perish very quickly in these environments. The desert around Dewey can be harsh, especially for someone on foot with no supplies. Without shelter, nighttime temperatures in that region can drop dangerously low, increasing the risk of hypothermia for anyone lost outdoors. If Haruchika became injured or disoriented after crashing his car, he could have wandered off and succumbed to the elements. Authorities did search extensively in the vicinity of the crash, but the terrain is vast and rugged. It is possible that Haruchika's remains were missed during the initial search, or have yet to be discovered, perhaps hidden by brush or washed away by seasonal floods. However, the lack of any tracks or other signs despite search efforts leaves this theory unproven. If he did perish in the wilderness, it would explain the complete silence, but without any discovery, an accident remains only a possible explanation. Another widely discussed possibility is that Haruchika experienced a sudden mental health crisis or psychological break that led him to behave erratically and abandon his life. Those who support this theory note the abrupt, unannounced trip far from home and Haruchika's uncharacteristically odd behavior. Knocking on a stranger's door asking to stay the night and then crashing through a gate are cited as key examples of this. These actions suggest he was confused or distressed. By all accounts, he was normally responsible and stable, so something must have snapped to drive him to act so out of character. Some have speculated that the pressure of his business ventures or personal issues might have been weighing on him, potentially triggering an emotional breakdown. If Haru was in a psychological crisis, it could have led him into danger, or even a failed attempt to voluntarily hide from the troubles in his life. Some observers have even compared Haruchika's situation to other cases where seemingly well-adjusted people suddenly abandoned their lives. This theory is hard to prove without more evidence, but it offers one possible explanation for his otherwise inexplicable actions. This theory is complicated by the fact that there's nothing definitive to suggest that he was in the midst of a breakdown prior to leaving. Thus, the mental breakdown idea is essentially an educated guess based solely on his bizarre final behavior. Nonetheless, the extraordinary nature of his disappearance means investigators cannot rule out that something in his mind went very wrong that weekend. A further variant of this theory suggests that he may have used psychoactive substances. His last Facebook post about giving everything away has been suggested to be potentially driven by the ingestion of such a substance. Ultimately, though, like with the other theories, this is interesting, but there's simply nothing beyond weak circumstantial evidence. Other less likely theories involve foul play or a voluntary disappearance, but these simply have no evidence to support them whatsoever. Nearly a decade later, Haruchika Miyagi's fate remains unknown. Neither his family nor investigators have given up, but with each passing year without answers, it becomes less likely the case will be solved. Personally, I think his case is often discussed because it's so confounding. A man with a stable life ends up far from home, behaves bizarrely, and then vanishes without a trace. All we know for certain is that Haruchika Miyagi is missing, and the circumstances are unexplained, and everything else is open for speculation. Hey everyone, Jimmy here with a reminder to like and subscribe, and also check out the Lazy Chill True Crime Show wherever you get your podcasts. I've included a link to the podcast in the description, so make sure to follow over there for bonus content. Picture a quiet evening in a Russian pharmacy. Customers are browsing the aisles and everything seems ordinary. Suddenly, a man walks in wearing a medical mask and a baseball cap, carrying a black plastic bag. Without warning, he pulls a sawed-off shotgun from the bag and fires into the store. Chaos erupts. People scream and scramble for cover as the gunman briefly steps back outside to reload. Moments later, he returns and calmly shoots an injured customer again at point-blank range before vanishing into the city streets. This isn't a movie scene, but a real crime from 2011. The unknown perpetrator would later be dubbed the Pharmacy Maniac by the press. The Pharmacy Maniac's first known attack took place on May 26, 2011. In the late afternoon, a young man in a surgical mask and cap walked into a Classica pharmacy on a busy central street in Chelyabinsk. He was carrying a plastic bag that concealed a sawed-off shotgun. Inside the store were several employees and customers going about their day. The masked intruder suddenly pointed the shotgun and demanded the equivalent of $2,000 from those present, threatening to shoot anyone who didn't cooperate. Panicked, the people began handing over cash and valuables. As this robbery unfolded, 49-year-old Vladimir Shin walked into the pharmacy, unaware of the danger. Shin was simply stopping by to pick up some medicine on his way home. The armed man yelled at him to stop, and when Shin tried to back out of the doorway, the gunman shot him in the chest, slaying him on the spot. In the commotion, some witnesses escaped out a back door, while the shooter fled through the front, disappearing into nearby alleyways before police could arrive. The whole incident lasted only minutes, leaving one innocent man dead and a community in shock. For several weeks, the pharmacy shooting appeared to be an isolated incident, a botched armed robbery with a tragic outcome. But on August 10, 2011, the predator struck again, and this time it was clear that he wasn't just your usual armed robber. Around 5:30 p.m., a man with a similar disguise walked into another Classica pharmacy near the site of the first attack. Without saying a word, he immediately opened fire on a customer near the entrance, 30-year-old Igor Ustinov, who had just briefly stopped in to grab a prescription. Igor fell to the floor wounded, and other patrons ran or hid in terror. The attacker didn't take any money from the register or make any demands. He simply fired another round into the store and stepped back outside. In that moment, we can speculate that Ustinov likely thought the worst of his nightmare was over. Unfortunately, this couldn't be further from the truth. Incredibly, the maniac then re-entered the pharmacy after a brief pause. As panicked onlookers cowered, the shooter walked up to the injured Ustinov and shot him in the head multiple times. According to some witnesses, the attacker muttered that it was, quote, "all your fault," and kept referring to the pharmacy staff as white coats. He slipped away into the streets, just as effortlessly as he had the first time. Security cameras captured the suspect leaving the scene, and police later traced his path through side streets, but they lost his trail about a mile away from the pharmacy. Despite dozens of eyewitnesses and footage of the crime, the mysterious shooter once again vanished without a trace. After this second attack, it became clear that Chelyabinsk had a serial predator targeting local pharmacies. The media branded the unknown assailant the Pharmacy Maniac, and fear spread through the city. For a time, some residents were even afraid to visit pharmacies for basic medicines, not knowing if the maniac would strike again. Law enforcement launched a massive manhunt, and the Classica pharmacy chain, the specific target in both cases, was put under special protection by the cops. Investigators collected descriptions from witnesses and released a composite sketch of the suspect, described as a light-haired man in his late 20s to mid-30s, of average build. He was often seen wearing a dark baseball cap and glasses, and the police plastered this sketch on public transportation, in shop windows, and across the city. Authorities also posted a 1 million ruble reward for information leading to the capture of the pharmacy maniac. For investigators, there were some clues, but also frustrating gaps. Ballistic tests confirmed that the same sawed-off weapon was used in both events, proving the attacks were linked. However, the weapon itself offered little insight. It was a common model used for hunting that had been illegally modified, making it impossible to trace ownership. The surveillance footage, while chilling, didn't reveal the shooter's face due to his cap and mask. Witnesses noted that during the second attack, the gunman looked unusually sickly, with a yellowish complexion and sores on his hands. Police checked local hospitals, hunted for anyone with relevant military experience, and even considered that the perpetrator might have fled the region or the country. Despite a thorough investigation that continued for years, the pharmacy maniac was never caught. With the case unsolved, many theories arose about the pharmacy maniac's identity and motive. One theory is that these were simply robberies gone wrong. In the first incident, the attacker clearly demanded cash and valuables, suggesting his goal was theft. Under this theory, the maniac might have been an ordinary criminal, driven by greed, who panicked when a customer entered into the ongoing crime scene. The second attack, however, complicates the robbery motive, as that time the assailant didn't even try to steal anything before opening fire. Some investigators thought the shooter might have had a personal grudge against the Classica pharmacy chain or the medical community. The fact that he targeted the same brand of pharmacy in the same area hinted at a possible vendetta. Notably, he did call the pharmacy workers white coats, which suggests that he may have been using this as a derogatory term towards healthcare workers. However, these theories also have significant holes. The attacker didn't actually physically harm any employees of Classica, which would be unusual if he was intending to attack healthcare workers. Further, if a vendetta against the Classica pharmacy chain was at play, he could have made his intentions much more specific, or released a manifesto. Another line of thought focuses on the attacker's psychological state. The pharmacy maniac's actions were extraordinarily violent, and he was clearly acting in a way that can't possibly be rationalized. Some experts profiled him as someone who might be suffering from a psychotic break, perhaps brought on by substance usage. The suspect's disheveled, sickly appearance with jaundiced skin and sores further fueled speculation that he might have been an addict. Under this scenario, the attacks might have been the result of paranoia or rage from an unstable individual rather than a calculated plan. Over a decade later, the pharmacy maniac case remains unsolved and continues to haunt the residents of Chelyabinsk. Even now, some residents of the city reportedly maintain a state of high alert while entering pharmacies, indicating the collective damage he did to the psyche of the people there. Late one night in January 2021, a rising rap artist who went by the name Six Dogs took a walk to one of his favorite spots, a building rooftop where he often went to gaze at the stars. He never returned alive, and the next day, news spread that the 21-year-old, whose real name was Chase Amick, had died after falling from that building. Chase was born on May 5th, 1999, and grew up in the Atlanta suburbs in a strict Christian household. As a teenager, he began crafting rap music in secret, aware that his devout mother would disapprove of his rhymes. In late 2016, at age 17, he uploaded a song called Flossing to SoundCloud. The track quickly went viral, introducing listeners to his laid-back, melodic style. Shortly after, Six Dogs released Fago Dreams, a hazy single that racked up tens of millions of streams. And yeah, for all the juggalos out there in my audience, don't get too excited. The title appears to be purely coincidental. By 2017, he had released his self-titled debut album, further expanding his audience. This rapid success caught the music industry's attention, and he soon landed a deal with Interscope Records. For most aspiring musical artists, this would have been an indisputably great development, but this small taste of fame brought serious complications at home. Once his mother discovered his secret music career, she was alarmed by the lifestyle that came with it, reportedly grounding him indefinitely. Determined to keep pursuing music, Six Dogs moved out of his family home at 18 to live with his girlfriend and focus on his art. Free from restrictions, he continued to build momentum and expand his creative vision. He collaborated with popular producer Benny Blanco, and in 2019, Six Dogs released his second album, Hi-Hats and Heartaches, which was well received by his growing fan base. His songs stood out for their dreamy beats and candid emotional lyrics. Many of his tracks openly touched on dark topics like depression and loneliness, giving a voice to struggles that resonated with young listeners. His introspective style led many to associate him with the emo rap wave of SoundCloud rappers, placing Six Dogs alongside artists like Lil Peep on the scene's moody, emotional end. By late 2020, Six Dogs was working on a third album, which he planned to title Ronald. That year had been difficult for him, and in July 2020, he contracted the Big Sneeze, an illness that forced him to delay recording while he recovered. He bounced back, but in a candid tweet that November, he hinted at the mental toll the music industry was taking, urging friends in the industry to check in on each other. Still, to those around him, Six Dogs appeared optimistic about the future. He had even stated in an interview that he wasn't depressed and was excited about his new music, giving fans no obvious warning of any crisis ahead. Tragically, on January 26, 2021, Chase Amick's life came to an end. That night, he walked to a favorite lookout spot, a building in Atlanta where he often watched sunsets and stars, and fell from the rooftop, suffering fatal injuries. He was only 21 years old, and the exact circumstances of the fall remain unclear. Officially, authorities couldn't determine whether his plunge was accidental or intentional. It was known that Six Dogs had long battled quite severe mental health issues. He was open about struggling with bipolar disorder and occasional psychotic episodes that came from this. In fact, he once admitted that if he hadn't started making music during his lowest point, he might not still be here. This statement, and some of his lyrics, suggested to some fans that the fall may have been intentional. In the wake of Six Dogs' death, the hip-hop community mourned a bright young talent. Meanwhile, fans on forums and social media were trying to make sense of what happened. For many, it was frustrating that aside from a couple of brief statements on Six Dogs' Instagram confirming his passing, no details were provided about how he died. With so little information publicly available, various theories emerged. Some wondered if substances or an accidental overdose played a role, but others noted that Six Dogs had distanced himself from hard substances. Those who supported this theory argued that relapses are by far the most dangerous time to overdose on street pharmaceuticals. This is because people often take the doses they were accustomed to while they were in the midst of their battle with addiction. However, after months or years of being clean, tolerances fade in a massive way, leading to deadly results. Under this theory, it's suspected that he became disoriented while hanging out on the roof and then fell. Others argued that it was likely intentional, referring to Six Dog's mental health struggles and references to these thoughts in his music. Yet those close to him saw no indication that he intended to do any such thing, and many have argued that lyrics aren't a reflection of present reality. It's not hard to imagine that someone who had a difficult and stifling upbringing and dealt with serious mental health problems and addiction may have had those thoughts in the past. Ultimately, it's unlikely that the truth of the situation will ever be known. Shamanism is a spiritual practice found in many cultures across the globe, rooted in the belief that humans, nature, and the spirit world are intimately connected. Although the specific rituals and traditions of shamanism can vary greatly among different societies, a few core principles tend to be consistent. These are accepted as the existence of a spirit realm, the shaman's ability to enter altered states of consciousness, healing ability, and the role of the shaman as an intermediary between realities. Shamanic practices have been traced back thousands of years, with archaeological evidence suggesting that ritual specialists who engaged with the spirit world have existed since the Paleolithic era. The term shaman itself originates from the peoples of Siberia, where shamans were believed to communicate with spirits to heal the sick, predict the future, and influence natural events. From Siberia, the concept of the shaman traveled and took on different forms across Asia, the Americas, Europe, and parts of Africa. One reason for shamanism's spread and durability lies in its adaptability. Early hunter-gatherer societies relied heavily on their environment for survival. Scholars speculate that shamans, using their perceived ability to tap into occult knowledge, claimed to know where game would migrate and how to avoid natural disasters. As societies changed, shamanic practices were reshaped by agricultural shifts, interactions with neighboring cultures, and religious evolutions. Shamanism isn't generally a job one chooses. Instead, many communities believe the spirits themselves select the shaman. This calling can manifest through visions, dreams, or even prolonged illnesses that serve as initiation crises. In many cultures, it's thought that if the chosen individual ignores or refuses the call, further spiritual or physical affliction could result until they accept their destiny. By doing so, the future shaman demonstrates resilience and gains insights deemed vital for guiding others through suffering. Once an individual is identified as a potential shaman, they typically undergo a rigorous apprenticeship under the mentorship of an established practitioner. This training includes learning rituals, chants, myths, and medicinal uses of plants. In many regions, such as the Amazon rainforest, psychoactive substances are integral to this training. These substances are believed to facilitate contact with the spirit world and grant the shaman access to knowledge that can't be acquired through ordinary means. During apprenticeship, prospective shamans also learn methods for entering trance states without the aid of psychoactive plants. Techniques such as drumming, dancing, chanting, breathwork, fasting, and isolation are commonly employed. A defining characteristic of shamanism is the practitioner's ability to enter altered states of consciousness to interact with the spirit realm. This trance state, sometimes referred to as soul flight or journeying, is the linchpin of the shaman's power. Through trance, shamans claim to converse with spirits, departed ancestors, or animal guides, seeking guidance, healing, or protection for their communities. Shamans are frequently called upon to treat illnesses believed to have spiritual or energetic causes, such as soul loss, possession by malevolent spirits, or negative energies. Shamanic healing rituals often revolve around the principle that sickness can stem from a disruption in the person's relationship with the spirit world. By restoring this harmony, the shaman seeks to alleviate physical and emotional suffering in the patient. One common method is sometimes known as soul retrieval, in which the shaman enters a trance and journeys to the spiritual realm. In this realm, the shaman attempts to recover fragments of the patient's soul that are believed to have fled due to trauma or disease. Through chanting, drumming, and ritual actions, the shaman endeavors to reintegrate the lost parts into the individual's body and spirit. Afterward, the individual often participates in a series of ceremonies to solidify the healing and reestablish balance. Of course, shamanism has recently gained mainstream popularity, with trips being offered to destinations solely for the purposes of engaging in shamanic rites and rituals. Elizabeth Bathory, a 17th century Hungarian countess, is enshrined in legend as one of history's most prolific monsters. The lurid tales surrounding her have made Bathory infamous as the Blood Countess. However, modern historical research paints a very different picture. Increasingly, scholars are disputing the traditional narrative and suggest that Bathory may have been the victim of a conspiracy. Under this theory, she was framed by powerful political and family rivals who stood to benefit from her downfall. Bathory lived in a time of intense turmoil in the Kingdom of Hungary. The early 1600s saw Hungary split into factions amid ongoing wars with the Ottoman Empire and the Counter-Reformation conflicts in Europe. Since the disastrous Battle of Mohacs in 1526, Hungary had effectively been divided into three parts. The western and northern regions were under Habsburg rule and were known as Royal Hungary. The central portion was under direct Ottoman occupation, and the eastern Principality of Transylvania, which was semi-autonomous. This meant that Hungarian politics were a high-stakes game involving the Catholic Habsburg Empire, the Protestant nobility of Transylvania, and the ever-present threat of the Ottomans. The Habsburgs were staunch Catholics intent on reimposing Catholicism, while many Hungarian nobles, including the Bathory family, were Protestant and resisted Habsburg religious control. In this climate, accusations and scandals could be weaponized to eliminate political opponents. At the time of Elizabeth Bathory's alleged crimes, her cousin György Thurzo was the Palatine of Hungary, the king's representative. King Matthias II, an Austrian Catholic Habsburg ruler, sat on the Hungarian throne. Both had vested interests in curbing the influence of powerful nobles in this unstable realm. Bathory's own nephew, Prince Gabriel Bathory, ruled Transylvania and was actively involved in Hungary's independence movement against Habsburg rule. Gabriel even eyed the Hungarian throne, a direct threat to King Matthias. As a Protestant with significant land holdings, Elizabeth Bathory was caught in the crosshairs of these power struggles. The Habsburg court had ample motive to discredit the Bathory family. Undermining Elizabeth's reputation would neutralize her political influence. Not only that, but it would also indirectly weaken her ambitious Transylvanian relatives. Indeed, contemporaneous records show that Matthias II had a very concrete incentive to move against her. The king owed Elizabeth an extremely large sum of money. Notably, after Bathory's arrest, that royal debt was conveniently canceled. This suspicious detail suggests that eliminating Bathory was financially advantageous for the crown. Elizabeth Bathory was not an obscure figure to contemporaries. She was born into one of the most illustrious families of Central Europe. The Bathory family had been major players in Hungarian and Transylvanian history since the 13th century. Her lineage included numerous princes of Transylvania, though this was a small-time role compared to the status of her uncle. This uncle, Stephen Bathory, was the elected King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania from 1576 to 1586. Raised a Calvinist Protestant, young Elizabeth received an excellent education for a woman of her time and was noted to be intelligent and strong-willed. At age 15, she married Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a member of another influential Hungarian dynasty. Nadasdy was a famed soldier celebrated for his battles against the Ottomans, earning the nickname the Black Knight of Hungary amongst his Turkish foes. Through this marriage, Elizabeth's social standing grew even higher, and the couple acquired a vast network of estates, including multiple castles, throughout Hungary. The couple controlled vast estates in Hungary, including the castle of Chaktice, which became Elizabeth's primary residence. They had several children together and lived in considerable wealth and privilege. When Ferenc Nadasdy died in 1604, Elizabeth became a widowed countess in her mid-40s, suddenly assuming sole control of the enormous combined estate. This made her one of the wealthiest landowners in Hungary. It was after her husband's death that dark rumors about Elizabeth's treatment of her servants began to spread more widely. Importantly, Bathory's status as a propertied widow also made her vulnerable. Her position was envied by other nobles, including her own kin. Indeed, there is evidence that some of Elizabeth's sons-in-law, who stood to inherit parts of her estate, were eager to control her lands and wealth. Thus, both the Habsburg authorities and elements of her extended family had something to gain from bringing Elizabeth Bathory down. The stage was set for what many historians now believe was a coordinated effort to remove the Countess and redistribute her riches under the guise of a criminal prosecution. The case against Elizabeth Bathory officially began in 1610, when complaints about the disappearance of young women in the area around Chaktice Castle could no longer be ignored. Locals whispered that peasant girls who went to work at the Countess's castle were never seen again. By late 1610, King Matthias II had ordered an investigation, which Palatine Georgi Thurzo undertook with zeal. According to the later trial records, Thurzo collected testimony from around 300 witnesses who alleged all manner of horrors. They told stories of girls being kidnapped or lured to the castle, then tortured by Bathory. Accounts spoke of beatings, burnings, and other even more ghastly tortures. When this evidence didn't prove convincing enough, these rumors grew to include even higher-born victims. Several minor noblewomen who had been entrusted to Bathory's care for etiquette training were said to have been eliminated by the Countess as well. It was this detail, that daughters of the gentry might have been among the victims, that finally prompted authorities to act decisively. On December 29, 1610, Thurzo raided Elizabeth's castle and arrested her along with 4 of her servants, who were alleged accomplices. A letter by Thurzo claims that upon arriving, he caught her red-handed, with her prey in the castle. In truth, however, this dramatic account appears to have been an embellishment for effect. Contemporary evidence indicates Bathory was actually having dinner when Thurzo arrived, not in the midst of torturing anyone. The quote-unquote prey girl found alive in the castle recovered from whatever had happened to her and never testified about any violations. Bathory herself was never given a trial, an extraordinary violation of the usual legal process, considering her rank. Thurzo and Bathory's relatives quickly agreed that she would be kept under house arrest, avoiding the spectacle of a public trial that could tarnish the noble family names. This also conveniently prevented Elizabeth from speaking in her own defense before any court. In early January 1611, 2 judicial proceedings were held to prosecute Bathory's servants. The servants, 2 older women, Dorothea Sentes and Ilona Yo, a younger woman, Katerina Benica, and a teenaged boy, Janos Uvari, were accused of being accomplices. Under torture themselves, these servants confessed to participating in the slayings of dozens of girls at Bathory's behest. The court found them guilty, and 3 were executed in a particularly brutal fashion. The 4th servant, Katerina, was spared execution and given life imprisonment, as the court believed she had been coerced by the others. Notably, I find this logic a little bit unusual. As if true, they were all asked to participate in these acts by the most powerful person in their world. Elizabeth Bathory, meanwhile, was simply kept locked in a set of rooms of her own castle. She would remain confined there for the rest of her life until her death in 1614. The evidence used to condemn Elizabeth Bathory has been a subject of growing skepticism. A close look reveals that the case was shockingly weak by modern standards, relying on hearsay, rumor, and coerced confessions. Although some 300 witnesses were interviewed, none of them claimed to have actually seen the Countess or her accomplices do anything. In fact, not a single alleged victim ever gave testimony. All the stories were second or third-hand accounts of what I heard happened at the castle. Many witnesses had been primed by local gossip before testifying. Some have suggested that Thurzo's men had spread the horrific rumors in each village to ensure everyone knew the narrative by the time they were questioned. Unsurprisingly, the testimonies were inconsistent, with different people citing wildly different numbers of victims. Some spoke of a dozen dead, others dozens or hundreds. The most sensational claim of all is that Elizabeth's body count was 650 individuals. This came from a witness who said that one of Bathory's estate administrators had seen such a number written in the Countess's private diary. Crucially, this mysterious diary was never produced as evidence, nor was its supposed witness able to confirm the story under oath. In short, the dramatic number of 650 victims was nothing more than unverified hearsay. By contrast, when Elizabeth's 4 servants were interrogated, the total number of victims they could come up with was 36. Furthermore, we have no record of any contemporaneous complaints or petitions from peasants regarding missing daughters or mistreatment by the Countess. In that era, it was common for villagers to send written complaints to the authorities even for minor offenses, so the absence of a paper trail alleging true evil is noteworthy. The picture that emerges is that the physical evidence of Bathory's guilt was scant. It was customary at the time for large estates to function partly as infirmaries. As a large landlord, Bathory was responsible for providing medical care to servants and tenants. Some of the quote-unquote torture described by witnesses may have actually been misunderstood accounts of primitive medical treatments like cauterization or bleeding sick patients. These procedures were gruesome by our standards, but were legitimate remedies for serious illness in the 17th century. It is easy to see how a superstitious witness, primed by terrifying rumors, might mistake a medical intervention on a dying plague victim for an act of torture. Ever since the 1980s, historians have revisited the Elizabeth Bathory case and cast doubt on the traditional accounts. What they have uncovered strongly suggests that Bathory was not a vampiric monster, but rather the target of a deliberate character assassination. As noted, King Matthias had obvious financial and political motives to remove Bathory, and he entrusted the task to Georgi Thurzo, who also stood to gain. The cooperation of Elizabeth's kin in her prosecution further hints at familial betrayal. Her 2 sons-in-law helped Thurzo quietly imprison her, likely angling to claim parts of her estate for themselves. Indeed, after Elizabeth was safely locked away, an agreement was reached to divide her vast lands among her family, ensuring the Habsburg crown couldn't seize everything. However, the Habsburgs did seize portions of the land and did succeed in breaking up the vast estates into smaller, easier controlled estates. Further, the Habsburgs drastically increased the land holdings of the Catholic nobility in Hungary and Transylvania to the detriment of the Protestant nobility. But let's get back to Elizabeth Bathory and discuss the most lurid claim against her. The most famous aspect of her story suggests that she preferred to bathe in the blood of virgins for the purpose of preserving her youth. This detail was first popularized in the 18th century by Jesuit writers over a century after Bathory's death as a sensational morality tale during the Counter-Reformation. Those later retellings were part of a broader effort to portray Protestant nobles as depraved, which further indicates how Bathory's story was co-opted for propaganda. Further, it was co-opted amongst those who believed that women shouldn't hold power in their own right, with the implication that Bathory resorted to sick acts to satisfy her vanity. In other words, the bloodbath legend is almost certainly fiction grafted onto her name long after she could defend herself. Notably, despite the extremely lurid accusations made against Bathory by Habsburg officials and in the trials of her accomplices, this detail was never even hinted at. Had there been any inkling of potential vampiric involvement, it stands to reason that the authorities would have brought this up in the trials. Today, the academic consensus is that Elizabeth Bathory's evil reputation far exceeds the probable reality of her life. While she may have been a harsh ruler, perhaps even guilty of inflicting punishment or cruelty on some servants, there's no reliable evidence for the most disturbing accusations against her.